Okay, we're rolling.
All right, this is an interview at Division of Military Naval Affairs Headquarters, Latham, New York. It is the 14th of March, 2007, approximately 10 a.m. Interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Michelle Sharadin, born May 27, 1967 in Troy, New York.
Okay, what was your educational background prior to entering the Guard?
Completed some college, but not a degree.
Okay. Why did you decide to join the Army National Guard?
When I first enlisted, I was still in high school, and I joined for the education benefits. I had enlisted with a friend of mine.
Okay. Well, I guess, when did you go in?
I was 17, so it was August 24th of 1984 that I enlisted.
Now, did you have to have permission from your parents to join?
I did. And that was kind of a controversy with my parents. My mother did sign for me to get in only because she didn't think I would make it through basic training. So she didn't think there was any harm in signing off.
Mm-hmm. You made it through basic.
Made it through basic. And
where was basic?
in Fort McClellan, Alabama. I went split option, so I had gone the summer of '85 for basic training, and then went back the summer of '86 for my AIT back at Fort McClellan for military police.
How long was that military police school?
I believe the AIT school was 4 months long.
Okay. And you trained men and women together?
Yeah, we were one of the first units that they started putting together at Fort McClellan with the males and the females. There were still companies there that were strictly males, some companies that were strictly females. But we were one of the first units, basic training companies, that they actually put the males and the females together.
How did you feel about that? How did others feel about that?
I think it actually worked out to be a good thing for us because we were pushed more to keep up with the males that were in the company. They didn't slow down for us to keep up when we were marching to different training sites. We were forced to just keep up with them at the pace that they were setting. And a lot of times we would see the companies that were just females, and there was a huge difference in attitudes. You could see that they weren't pushed as hard as we were. Their discipline wasn't as strict as ours was. And there was just a huge difference between the different kinds of companies.
Do you feel that the training was adequate? Were you well trained and prepared, you thought?
Definitely, yes. It was extensive down there.
Okay.
What were some of the things that you learned, both militarily and I guess as a person while you were there? Because you were so young.
Right. Socially, it was a shock. First time I had been away from home. It was the first time for just about everybody there that had been away from home. So socially, that was a shock to meet people from all over the United States who were accustomed to certain things, and all of a sudden that was taken away. You know, you're making your own decisions was taken away. You had to follow somebody else's schedule, and that was definitely a cultural shock for all of us, to have to deal with the different people from different areas, and what their norm wasn't what ours was, and learning to get used to each other and being able to interact with each other.
So when did you complete your AIT?
AIT was completed in September of '86.
Okay.
At that time, I was in the 105th Military Police Company.
And that was over in Troy?
Yeah, Gilmore Road.
Okay.
What were your parents' reactions to you completing the whole program?
Surprised, and they were proud.
Now, could you talk about your assignments with this unit and?
With the 105th MPs?
Yes.
It's a unit I first went into. Well, even in that unit, it was a little different because at the time that my friend and I had joined, we were the only two females that were actually in one of the platoons. There was one other female in the unit at the time, but she was in an admin position. So when we first got in, more or less, they didn't know what to do with us. They were a little bit mystified on where to put us, how to treat us. They didn't know how to integrate us into the rest of the unit, especially when it came to going out into the field. So there was some growing pains all the way around on that issue.
How were you accepted by your fellow soldiers in the unit?
It varied. Some accepted us immediately and were there to help us all the time, and others didn't think we should be there. You know, and there was still a lot of attitudes then, as there are still some now, that women don't belong in the military and we can't contribute.
Okay.
Have you found that it took a long while for that attitude to change? I know you said that there's still that attitude, but it's not as pervasive as it originally was.
Right, it's gotten much better. A lot of people aren't as, don't voice their opinion as much now as they did then. So it has gotten a lot better.
After you were in Troy with this unit, I guess, could you describe some of your assignments and what you've done basically since then?
When I left the 105th, which was in 1986, I was over in Stark for about 2 years, or about a year actually, and then I went to the 205th support group. The 205th support group, I was the unit clerk. I was there for about a year and a half, and then went back to the MP company. Again, there still weren't a lot of females in the MPs at that time. We had a couple more, but not a whole lot. And then I stayed in the MPs until probably about 89 when I went to the AG company for promotion.
Now, AG, you mean Adjutant General?
Right, it was the 42nd, there was a 42nd AG company at that time, which is
Okay.
now the 56 PSB.
Okay, and what was your job in that capacity?
I was a squad leader at the time that I went over to the AG company.
Okay. Did you hold any additional MOSs, or?
Yeah, I went from military police to 75 Bravo, which was the unit clerk position at the time.
Did you have to go away to school for the position?
I did some of it correspondence, and then after the correspondence, I did have to go to a 2-week school in Macon, Georgia.
Okay. And then where did you go after that?
Trying to remember the timeline of where I was when. I believe I went back to the MPs again and was there till just before my daughter was born. I decided to get out of the MPs because my husband and I were both in the same unit. We decided to have children, and I didn't want to have to, both of us, leave the children at the same time. So I left the MPs, went back to Stark, and stayed in Stark until 2002 when I went over to the 42nd ID for promotion to Master Sergeant.
Okay. You were with the unit when it went to Iraq?
Yes, I was.
Could you talk about that deployment?
How
How did you feel, you had the daughter at the time?
Right.
How did you feel leaving your family?
The situation I was in was a little bit different than everybody else because my husband had been deployed for 2 years to Fort Drum. He came home January of 2004. And in March of 2004, I was put on active duty orders for the advance to go down to Camp Smith to start doing the SRCs for the state.
And what is SRC?
The soldier readiness checks.
Okay.
So it was very difficult. He had only been home a month and a half, not even, about a month and a half when I was leaving to go down to Camp Smith. So we were just starting to readjust to each other again and get the kids readjusted to us both being home again.
No, you had more than one child at this time?
Two children, right.
Okay.
A daughter and a son.
How old were they?
They're 13 and 10 now, so they were 11 and 8.
Did you do anything to prepare them for you going?
Well, that all happened kind of quickly, so that was a little bit difficult. I found out I was going only weeks before I actually first got put on orders. So that was very difficult to prepare any of us for it. And it was scary for the kids. You know, they got used to Dad not being there. They got used to Mom being the one that was there all the time, doing everything for them, taking care of them. And then all of a sudden the thought of Mom's leaving was very scary for them. I think the kids were under the misconception at the time that I would be going to Fort Drum and staying at Fort Drum like their father did because he was able to come home on weekends. They weren't able to really get the concept that I wasn't going to be able to come home. That was very difficult for them once they realized that.
It must have been difficult for you, too.
It was. It was very difficult.
Okay, after you were down at Camp Smith, what did you do?
We spent about a month down in Camp Smith, came back up to Troy. The month of April was spent working in Troy, getting everything ready, and then in May we went up to Fort Drum. We spent from May until January up at Fort Drum doing the training. We were supposed to actually leave in October, however we got delayed a couple of months and never actually left till January. So we spent October to January just kind of doing day-to-day work. The training was all done at that point. We did have opportunities then to be able to come home every other weekend to see our families.
When were you finally deployed?
January, trying to remember the exact date. I think it was about January 18th is when I actually left Fort Drum and we went to Kuwait, and then we spent about a month in Kuwait and went up into Iraq.
Now, were there any restrictions on you as a woman in Kuwait?
I wouldn't say there was any more restrictions on us in Kuwait than there was any other time. We were treated, like everybody else.
Okay. What did you do for that month in Kuwait?
We were slowly sending some units forward, established some of our policies a little bit firmer once we were there, and things we had trained were actually different than what was really happening over there. So we just adjusted our policies a little bit to what was going on, and at that time we were in Kuwait, it was mostly just a matter of tracking personnel. Numbers, who was where, what was going on.
Was the entire division in one place, or was it somewhat spread out?
It was spread out. When I had gotten over to Kuwait, Some of the units had already gone up into Iraq, and we had them at different places in Kuwait. I was at Camp Buren. We had people at Doha. I think those are the two areas in Kuwait that we had people.
Did you have any trouble adjusting to the climate change? Going from January weather to
well, actually,
100-degree
it
temperature?
wasn't too bad because when we got there, it was their winter.
Mhm.
And although their winter isn't anything like ours, it was still a little bit cold, so we were still wearing jackets. So it wasn't a complete shock
Mhm.
when we got over there. It was probably the best time for us to get there so that we didn't go through a complete shock with the weather being different.
When did you eventually go into Iraq, and where were you assigned?
In February, we moved up to Iraq, and I was in Tikrit and FOB Danger. I had flown up. I didn't go up with the convoy. There was someone up with the convoy, and some flew up. It was kind of like half and half.
You flew by helicopter?
No, we went in by, we didn't go in by helicopter.
C-130 or?
I believe it was a C-130. We flew up by C-130 into Spiker, and then they took us in Chinooks from Spiker over to FOB Danger, which was on basically the other side of the city.
Mhm. Were you under fire at all while you were over there?
I was never under direct fire.
Mhm.
I mean, we had mortars coming in, kind of became a daily occurrence and a daily expectation that the mortars were going to be coming in, but I was never under any direct fire while I was there.
Were they fairly close when they came in?
We had quite a few that landed on the FOB, yes.
Mhm.
There was one instance when we were in the DFAC, we had 3 mortars come in and hit out in the parking lot. Of course, being lunchtime, there was a lot of people moving about. There were about 6 people that were injured that day,
Mhm.
but nobody was fatal.
Mhm.
We did have one fatal occurrence on the FOB from a mortar coming in. And it was one of those situations, the wrong place at the wrong time. I mean, unfortunately, he was standing right next to a bunker, but never expected the mortar to actually make it to where he was.
Yeah.
The mortars were hitting the island, which there was a bridge that went from where we were across to the island. Most of the mortars were hitting the island, and he just expected that's where it was going, but by chance, that one just cleared, and he was standing right next to where it hit.
Mm.
Now, you mentioned under daily life you had problems sometimes with your electrical equipment.
Yes, the power wasn't always the most reliable thing. We ran mostly on generators, but sometimes the generators would go down. So we had a lot of times that the power would go out. Usually it didn't last for long periods of time. It would usually last for maybe about an hour before they got the generators up and running again. But that was just a regular occurrence, but not for long periods of time. It was just, it would be an irritating thing more than anything else.
Was there a lot of problem with sand?
Yes.
How did you yourself adjust to sand?
Well,
Did you ever?
myself, I guess you didn't have a choice but to adapt to it. I mean, there was no getting away from it, no matter where you were. It was just absolutely inside, outside. There would be days that the sand would be so bad that even in the office itself, you couldn't see to the other side of the room. Your eyes would be burning. It would just look like the whole room was filled with smoke because there was just so much sand in the air. So you had no choice but to adapt to it.
What about things like scorpions or snakes? Any of those?
No, I was very lucky and didn't get to see any snakes since I have a terrible fear of them. That was That was the biggest thing I was probably afraid of, was running into a snake over there. But I was lucky enough and didn't have that occurrence, although some people did.
Mhm.
The biggest problem we had with bugs was probably the camel spiders, because they would usually come out at night, you couldn't see them, but then all of a sudden you would hear them, and you weren't sure where they were.
Did they
What do you
bite?
mean hear them?
You could actually hear their nails, I mean, they were, can't call them feet,
Uh-huh.
on coming across the ground.
How big were they?
I never saw one that was probably, I never saw one bigger than my fist. Some people did see bigger ones,
Wow.
but I never saw
Uh-huh.
any of the really big ones.
Now,
But
would they bite?
they would sometimes be aggressive, yes,
Uh-huh.
and they would bite. They weren't, I found out they really weren't poisonous, but they would leave a nasty flesh wound when they did bite.
Mhm.
Now, what kind of living quarters did you have?
When I first got there, I was put in a room in the third floor of the main palace. But that was just for a short time frame. And then the junior enlisted were in, it was a house. It was just bedrooms and bathrooms is what it was. There were some issues with the junior enlisted being left alone over there, so eventually I moved over into that house with them and was living in a little tiny room.
So initially you got to live in a palace, huh?
Well, yeah, you say a palace and it sounds like this was this huge, fabulous thing, which it
Uh-huh.
was huge, but the workmanship of the Iraqis was so bad that the place was literally falling down around us.
We had someone describe last week that it was basically a facade.
Oh, it was. It was very shabbily put together.
Mhm.
It was, pieces of the wall would literally just fall out. You know, things were constantly falling apart, doorknobs were breaking off. There was one instance, I had gone into the bathroom upstairs, and since it was mostly living quarters up there really weren't, during the middle of the day, there weren't many people up there. I had gone into the bathroom and the doorknob broke. And I was stuck for an hour in the bathroom, banging on the door and yelling, before somebody finally came upstairs and I could hear footsteps out there walking
Uh-huh.
through, banging on the door and yelling, and they heard me. And they had to go and get one of the contractors that had a toolbox and come and take the door apart to
Uh-huh.
get me
Huh.
out. I mean, so it wasn't actually the best
Uh-huh.
thing, even though it was considered a palace.
Okay.
Now, what about your food?
The food was up for a lot of controversy. When we first got there, it wasn't too bad, actually. But then they changed contractors. What happened when we got there, some people in the unit who thought they were doing a good thing talked to the contractors who were cooking the food and serving it. And they tried to organize these people into a union, which should have been left alone. They should not, I feel they overstepped their bounds in getting involved with these contractors in that way. The contractors started demanding more money. The company, KBR, refused to give them more money and let them all go, and brought in a whole new group of people from Africa to cook our food and whatnot. Well, there's a huge difference between the way they make their food, we make our food, and food went downhill, in our opinion, very quickly. They were trying to cook American food in their customary way of cooking food, and it just did not come out very well. A lot of the times the food wasn't fresh, especially the vegetables and any kind of bread products. They were usually old and stale, and vegetables were turning colors, so the food wasn't the best thing.
So you didn't have an Army mess unit?
No, we brought our mess personnel with us, however, they did not act in that capacity. They acted in the capacity of security for the FOB.
Okay.
They were head counters in the mess hall,
Mhm.
but they did not actually do the cooking for us, which I think would have been better if they had.
Mhm. Now, what about keeping in touch with your family?
Yeah.
Did you have email? Or?
Yeah, well, I was very lucky in that because of being in the position I was in as the human resources manager. I was on the computer all the time.
Mhm.
I had internet connection all the time, so I was able to email back and forth at home on a regular basis. I also had access to the telephones in the office, so I was able to use a calling card to call home. The only challenge I had was the time difference. From when I could call them when the kids were home and out of school, my husband was home from work. That sometimes time difference posed a problem.
What was the time difference? If it was 12 o'clock at noon over there, what time was it here?
Well, there was an 8-hour difference.
8 hours? Okay.
Right. So a lot of times when the kids and my husband would all be home, it was usually about the time that, you know, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, when I would already be to bed or just going to bed,
Mhm.
and I'd have to stay in the office later to make sure that I could call home and get a hold of everybody.
Were there any problems with your children adjusting to you being gone at all during the time you were gone?
There was, I'd rather not go there.
Okay. That's okay. So, I guess, did you ever have much contact with the local people?
I had a little bit contact with them, as in one of my duties was to take care of the money over there. We would be given, I believe it was like $10,000 at a time. We would go over and draw out, and we would use that money to buy equipment and supplies that we needed. So I had a little bit of contact with them in that I dealt with some of the local people in acquiring our supplies, ordering stuff and whatnot.
What things did you buy locally, for example?
Our normal office supplies that we needed, you know, paper,
Mhm.
pens, that kind of stuff. Some equipment, as equipment would break, it would sometimes be hard to replace it, so I would deal with the outside contractor to get scanners or printers or that kind of materials that we needed.
Did you do much traveling off base at all?
I did a little bit. I went down to Baghdad probably about 3 times, had to go over to Spiker a few times. Most of the traveling I did, though, was by helicopter.
Mhm.
There was only one time that I went by convoy, which was from FOB Danger over to Spiker. So it's normally about a half an hour ride to go around the city. And we did run into a little situation on that convoy. I was originally scheduled to take a helicopter that morning.
Mhm.
And they said, oh, no, just go ahead, go with the convoy. You haven't been on a convoy yet. It'll be fine. I went. Just as we were coming off of our FOB, we weren't even a mile off of it. Somebody spotted an IED on the side of the road. So we had to go back, pull security. We were there probably about an hour and 45 minutes. We had to pull security on the area until EOD came and they were able to take
Detonate
the
it?
item.
Oh, they took it?
Well, they did, right, they didn't actually detonate it. They found it was a 50 cal round with deck cord around it,
Hmm.
but it hadn't actually been activated yet. So they were able to just take it, put it back in the back of their special truck and take it away. Any other time I went by helicopter.
Mhm. Did you get any leave time at all while you were over there?
I did, I got my 2 weeks leave, and I took it, we were more than halfway done with our time over there before I
Mhm.
took my leave, which I think was worked out to be the best for me personally. We had individuals that had to take it after only being there for a couple of months. So it was very hard for them, and knowing once you go home, you know what you're coming back to. It's not like the first time you go over, it's kind of exciting. You've heard the stories, but you really don't know what to expect, and it's kind of an exciting thing.
Mhm.
But once you've been there and you go home on leave, it's very difficult coming back because that excitement's long gone. You know exactly what you're coming back to. And for those people that took their leave at the beginning, it was very difficult for them because they knew they had a long stretch before they were going to be going home.
You came home for your leave?
Yes,
Was it hard leaving the family?
it was very difficult after being home to have to tell them goodbye again, and you know, but knowing that I only had a few more months made it a little bit easier. You know, the worst of it, the longest stretch of it was done and over with.
Mhm.
When did you come home permanently?
In November is when we came back from Iraq back to Fort Drum.
This is a what year?
2005.
Yeah, okay. Thought it was. Okay, how do you feel about your time in Iraq?
I have mixed feelings about it. I think probably the best feelings I have about it was our section itself. We started out going up to Fort Drum as there was maybe 10 of us in the section. We grew to be about 58 strong when we actually went overseas. It was mostly young people in our section. Most of the age group went from about 19 to 24 was the majority of the age group in our section. And they didn't just come from New York. We had kids from all over the states come into our section. And other than being away from basic and AIT, which is a very structured environment, and now they're away from home for a long period of time that isn't as structured. So there was a lot of learning that they had to do, a lot of growing as they had to do as individuals. And I was very impressed with how the maturity levels changed. And they learned to live together and work together as a unit. It's very difficult being with the same person 24 hours a day on end. A lot of people you'll hear in marriages that once they retire, you know, somebody has got to do something and get out of the house because you can't spend every minute of every day together. And here, these young people were forced to do that. They worked together, they slept together, they ate together, they were with each other 24 hours a day without a break. And it was a difficult thing, and they were able to adjust and come to terms and learn to respect each other and each other's different ways and be able to deal with that.
How do you feel about the mission in Iraq?
I try not to let my personal feelings get involved with what we're doing. I didn't go to Iraq because I agreed or disagreed with what was going on. I went to Iraq because of the people I was going with, and I felt a commitment to them. We're going to be in Iraq for a lot longer, right or wrong. We're there, we're entrenched. We are made an impact on the lives of these people, and we can't just walk away from it.
What have you been doing? What have your assignments been since you returned?
We got back in November. I had to stay up at Fort Drum for longer for some medical reasons that came up. They were cleared up. I was finally left in July, the end of July. In November, we started our soldier readiness checks for the division again. So the op tempo for me hasn't slowed down yet. It's still been going at least once, twice a month. We're on the road again, going to another unit, Buffalo, Camp Smith. So the op tempo for me hasn't slowed down. With the mobilizations coming up, I am going back on active duty again. I will be mobilizing, but I'm not going to be deploying this time.
Do you think there is a possibility sometime in the future you may be deployed again?
Well, I think there's a very good possibility the division's going to be deployed again.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know when it's going to happen. It's probably not going to be for a few years yet, but I think there's a very good possibility that the division's going to be deployed again. Some of the units that are going right now are going for their second time.
Mm-hmm.
You've been in the Guard over 20 years. What changes have you seen in the Guard?
When I first came in '84, the Guard was still kind of considered the boys' club. If you ask people then why they were in the Guard, it was because it was their weekend to hang out with the guys. Over the past 20 years, the Guard has become much more institutionalized. It's become much more focused. People are getting better training. There's more of a purpose to the Guard itself and to why people are in the Guard now.
Okay, thank you very much. Anything else you want to add? Okay, very good interview.
Okay, yes, excellent.